Hi, and welcome to another painting tutorial, this time as part of my Heresy Diary series, in which I'm going to take you along the process of my Heresy army. And this time I'm going to show you how I painted my Justaerin Terminators for my Sons of Horus. So these are going to be the normal plastic cataphractite Terminators, not the fancy Forge World ones. So let's get to it. So after I primed all the models black, I gave all of them another coat of Vallejo Black, just to have a unifying finish and to have a nice base on which I can correct later on without creating different finishes with working with different color types and color finishes. So I started with these leather straps and things under the shoulders, and for that I used Scale 75's red leather, which is a really dark red. It's even darker if it dries, and it's really matte, but I think it's a good foundation for like a reddish leather, but I'm going to saturate it later on. So if you want to have something more saturated, you can start maybe with a burnt red tone, or like even something like corn red from GW, and maybe work in the shadows afterwards with a shade. And you don't have to be too careful when applying these base coats, because you can always go back and fix mistakes with the Vallejo Black again. Yeah, and I would really recommend doing this in batches, because it's not too much work and it's not going to be a pain in the ass to do 5 at a time and then it's done. Next step will be highlighting the straps with Scale 75 Deep Red this time. And this is the saturating part I was talking about. So this isn't the most saturated red, but on the red leather it's kind of saturated. And this is really thin. I don't know why. You can apply it thicker. I did like 3 or 4 coats of this to have some effect, and I think you can save yourself a lot of time if you go in thicker layers, because I think 2 thicker layers will be fine enough. And this should be distressed leather, so they don't have to have like really fine blends and gradients, so don't bother too much about that. And for the final gradient I will mix a bit of blood red into the deep red, also from Scale 75, just to push the reflections up a bit and just to have something nice to contrast the black later on. I'm focusing this on the top halves of these straps and those parts that would be naturally exposed to the light. So for the next step I'm going to mix in a bit of light skin tone into the red, just to keep the warmth, and I'm going to stipple around the edges. So this is going to be a traditional edge highlight. As I said, this is going to be distressed leather. So I'm just going to stipple it around all these strips of leather to create like a weathered look. And again, this is already part of weathering, so you don't have to be too precise about that. And if you mess something up, that's just either battle damage, or you can always go back and fix it with one of the other red tones. And now onto the shoulder pads. So I'm not too familiar with the heraldry of the Justearin, but they seem to have one red shoulder pad most of the time. And for that I used burnt red from Pro Acryl. And if you can't get Pro Acryl where you live, just use another burnt red. Like the deep red is pretty similar already. Something like corn red from GW is fine as well. I think the Pro Acryl, it has less purple in it in a way. Yeah, and then just base coat all the red parts with the red. Same as with the leather straps, I mixed in blood red into my Pro Acryl color, and then I did like a stipple around the edges, and I also did a few scratches with this, but this shouldn't be an edge highlight. This should be more of like a distressed edge. You're just prepping the surface for some more battle damage later on, so don't be too careful about it. And here you can see the look I'm going for. Yeah, just a few scratches around the edge. And then we are going to do the same with the black armor. So no precise edge highlight, just stipples and scratches around the edges. And this time with Scale 75 Petroleum Grey, which is a pretty dark grey with a slight purple tinge to it. And I really like it to highlight black. I think it makes it look a bit more interesting without taking the blackness away. And here you can see me stipple around the edges. The nice thing about this technique is that it functions as an edge highlight and as battle damage at the same time. And the next step is pretty much the same again. Mix in some of the basic flash into the petroleum grey and just do the same again to get some more highlights, especially where the light hits raised areas, raised edges, to make it stand out a bit more. With this, I would be a bit more careful, because if you overdo it, you have like these big chunky light highlights, which doesn't look great with the overall look of this type of painting, in my opinion. And again, focus on the areas that would get more damage in battle, like for example the fist, or maybe the lower parts of the legs, the frontal area, the front shoulder pads. It doesn't really matter to do this in areas of the model you can't really see if they are standing on the tabletop or in a display case. So yeah, try to be aware of where you want to put some more effort in. Next step will be the gun casing, and this is how I like to do all my gun casing that aren't just silver. I just glaze some Eclipse Grey, which is a bit more neutral, maybe on the bluish side, on the upper parts of the gun casing. So you have a slight gradient from dark black on the lower parts to like this Eclipse Grey on the upper part. And then I'm going to edge highlight this on the upper edges with something like a neutral grey. In this case, I think it was graphite grey. And here you can see a finished example on the other model. And now onto the metallics, which is quite an important step considering all the trim these models have. And I think it's also an easy way to get a lot of details out of your model without spending too much time on edge highlighting or battle damage. I started with base coating all the metallics with scale 75 decayed metal for everything that's going to be gold, and the silver I'm just going to base coat with GW lead belcher. Not everyone likes GW metallics, but I think this tone in particular still is one of my favorites, so I'm going to continue using it. And yeah, here you can see me rotating the model around, so you can look what I painted in silver, what I painted in gold, and then I'm going to apply all the decals. And I use the Forge World decals because they have these gold symbols, which I really like. They are quite expensive, but I think they are really worth it. And I'm not going to show you how I apply them, because I never did a really great job in applying them and sealing them. So you have to look that up for yourself, I'm sorry. And here you can see me highlighting the gold with scale 75 Necro Gold, which is a really dark gold, but it has a really nice tone and it's amazing contrasting to black because it's not too bright. It's not this bright yellowish golds you have with elves and stuff, which doesn't look great on a model that's mainly black. Then I did a second highlight with a mix of Necro Gold and Peridot Alchemy. And Peridot Alchemy is a really light greenish gold, but it's perfect to set off the black without making it too bright. And it makes the gold look really interesting without highlighting it too much. And with that done, I started with the weathering. For that I used Scale Artist Colors, Burnt Sienna Umber and Burnt Umber, and GW's Mournfang Brown. Don't bother if you don't have the Scale Artist Colors, just use any browns. I mean, a chocolate brown, a dark brown, a reddish brown, everything is probably fine. And the main thing is that you have something that contrasts the black a bit. You aren't going to notice this huge amount, mainly on the red parts you are going to see it. And the Mournfang Brown you're going to see a bit more, and this I use just in very very thin layers to simulate some rust or some dirt and grime that's collected in recesses or around rivets. And just go around the model, place the brown spots where you already placed like the highlights and the scratches, so you have like something, you're simulating something like indents. And this is going to be noticeable on the red, and it looks really nice. On the black, you aren't going to see it that much. And then as a last step, I just put in small patches of lead belcher into the brown patches and did some kind of stippling around some edges just to simulate some wear. So you don't have to do this if you don't like it, but for me it was just an easy way to make the model look a bit more interesting and have the edges stand out a bit more without too much effort and edge highlighting. So you can leave it at that, but I'm going to do an oil wash now. Everyone's favorite part, I know. I'm not going to use any specific ratio in my oil washes. I do them on every model I do for this army, and I usually use some dark brown with like a burnt umber, any umber color with like a bit of sienna in it to push the brightness up a bit and make it a bit more reddish. and most of the time I put it in a little more black as well, just to have it a bit darker. And I do it very thin, so I thin it down a lot with Winsor Newton's Sons of Horus thinner, and then I'm going to put that all over the whole model. You can do this more precise and more accurate as I am, but I don't have the patience to take my time and look where it should be. I just flood the model with the oil, and I also didn't varnish the model, and it seems to be fine most of the time. Sometimes you will rub off a bit of paint underneath, but on a black model that's not too bad, so I don't bother with varnishing since I don't have an airbrush and I hate rattle can varnish. Later on I'm going to take some of the paint off, some of the oil off, and I'm doing that carefully with the brush most of the time. Sometimes I use Q-tips, as you can see here, like a makeup sponge to soak up a bit of thinner and go over the raised parts just to take some of the stain off and leave the oil in the recesses. The downside is that with that much thinner, this will take quite a while to dry. So it will be dry-ish after 24 hours, but it will be really dry after 48 or 72 hours. So I really recommend just doing this in batches. But the only thing left to do will be the base, so this won't be too much of an issue and you can actually play with them with the oil wash on. So I'm not too bothered about that. And for the base, I'm just going to use pigments. I based the models with the base ready mix, just some rubble and sand, and it's already black because I based the models before priming. And now I'm just going to put some pigments on. In this case, Green Stuff World Middle Earth, Ammonic Dark Earth, Ammonic Russian Earth, and Scale Soilworks Sand. The brands don't really matter, pigments are pigments. I just use like a reddish brown, a really dark brown, a yellowish brown, and a sand color. You don't have to be too particular about tones. I just found that these work really well together. I try to place the reddish brown around bigger rocks and like metallic parts in the base, and then I try to place the dark earth around the edges to have like a small vignette around the base. And as a last pigment I put on the sand color just to simulate dry ground or ashes that have collected on the floor. I also try to push in the pigments really hard with the brush because I don't like using pigment binders or pigment fixers, because I still haven't found a way to do it properly or do it nicely. So I just leave them like this, and what falls off. I don't really mind. Normally most of it stays in the base and it's fine. And that's it. These are my finished Justearians. I hope you liked the video. I hope you can take something away from it, even if you don't replicate the scheme the same way as I did. And if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.